I would love a cup of tea, thank you, then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea, or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no thank you, then don't make them tea, at all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, yes, please, that's kind of you. And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, but we wanted tea last week. Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, but you wanted tea last night. But if you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
Any questions on consent? All right. So it seems really simple, right, when we think about it with tea. But somehow that issue gets a lot more complex when we think about it in the form of relationships. But if you can always go back to that video, and would I give this person tea right now? If your answer is no, then you probably shouldn't have sex either. Unless they don't like tea, which then it's a moot point, right? So reprisals. What are reprisals?
Like revenge, getting back at the person for tattletaling.
Okay. Revenge is a great word to use. So there's a lot of different definitions of reprisals in here. We'll touch on what they are. So taking or threatening to take an adverse or unfavorable personnel action, or withholding or threatening to withhold a favorable action. That's not okay. So if somebody comes forward and says, I think that this person sexually assaulted me, and then because of that report, they don't get promoted, or they don't get a transfer, or they don't get to go to the school that they want to, that's reprisals. That is a reprisal. Ostracism, which is defined as excluding from social acceptance, privilege, or friendship, a victim or other member of the armed forces because they reported a criminal offense, they were believed to have reported a criminal offense, or the ostracism was motivated to prevent them from doing so. That is also a form of reprisal. You cannot exclude people because you think that they told on you, or that they told on somebody that you're friends with. Acts of cruelty, oppression, or maltreatment, you can look up this reference if you need a definition of those terms, committed against a victim, an alleged victim, or any member of the armed forces by peers or any other person, because they reported a criminal offense or believed to have reported a criminal offense. As a leader, you must stop any indication of reprisal as soon as you see it. What happens if you don't?
You're in trouble.
You're in trouble. That's exactly right. As leaders, it is our responsibility to ensure that every single one of our soldiers is safe from all of these actions. So if you fail to do so, it will result in disciplinary action if you are caught. This does not have to be in person, and social media is exactly the same. If somebody is being bullied through social media because of reporting any criminal offense, but a sexual assault specifically in this situation, that is also a crime. You cannot do that. Soldiers can report reprisal incidents to JAG, but they should also let their chain of command know. So the chain of command should always be aware if any of this is happening. However, soldiers do always have the right to go to JAG with this. Best course of action, not to do anything to a soldier is report it. So treat them as if that scenario never happened, right? If they are next up for a school, you send them to school. If they're up for promotion, you do their promotion. If they're OER, their NCOER is due, you do their OER or NCOER, as you would have had this situation or the report never occurred. Is anybody confused on what constitutes a reprisal? Or does anybody have questions on reprisals? So a huge percentage, well over half of victims still feel that some sort of negative action or reprisal happened after they reported their sexual assault. So I think that's a really important thing for us to remember, is that victims, whether it's perceived or actual, feel that these things are happening. So as leaders, we need to make sure that we create this culture where this is absolutely not tolerated. So sexual assault versus sexual harassment, we'll touch on this a little bit. What's the difference?
Touch and no touch.
That's a good one. That's one big difference between them. Sexual assault is intentional sexual contact, characterized by the use of force, threats, intimidation, or abuse of authority when the victim does not or cannot consent. We went pretty thoroughly through what consent is. So this could be rape, sexual assault, aggravated sexual assault, abusive sexual contact, forcible sodomy, or any attempt to commit these acts. So if you try to rape somebody but you are not successful, you have still sexually assaulted them. Any attempt to do any of these things still falls under that definition. And it is a crime. Sexual harassment, on the other hand, is a form of gender discrimination. It includes unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature when it's made explicitly or implicitly a term or condition of somebody's pay, job, or career. Also, submission or rejection of such conduct by a person is used as a basis for career employment decisions. That is also not okay. And such conduct interferes with an individual's performance or creates an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment. So we want to create that positive work environment, and sexual harassment does the opposite. This does not go through your victim advocate. You could come to your victim advocate, but they would bring you to your EO individual at whatever unit you're at. So your victim advocate can still help you with this, but they're not the one who's going to walk you through the reporting process. Sexual harassment leads to sexual assault. So it creates that hostile work environment. It creates a climate that's more conducive to sexual assault. It sets a tone of objectification. And when people are reduced to being objects, it justifies that mistreatment. So what are some examples of sexual harassment that creates that environment? Anything you've seen or heard at other units or in your civilian career, or examples from previous training?
Right, having vulgar calendars or posters up on the wall,
Sure?
and certain types of jokes that are told.
Absolutely. And what makes it harassment?
Someone being offended by what was said.
Thank you. It's how that other person feels, right? Not what your intent was. So it doesn't matter if you intended to sexually harass somebody. What matters is that they perceived that harassment. And it reduces empathy for the victim. And that really creates a culture that we don't want. It gets back to that victim blaming. And we want to avoid that. So human sex trafficking. Now, this isn't a topic that we really talked about in previous SHARP training. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but we want to touch on it because it's becoming such a huge issue. And Minnesota is not immune to that. So sex trafficking. Anytime that people are forced or coerced into the commercial sex trade. So prostitution or pornography. Like sex offenders, sex traffickers are going to target anybody that's vulnerable. And oftentimes it is girls. There's often violence included, and we're going to look at a chart here on the next slide that explains what to look for and what the process is of an individual becoming involved in sex trafficking. And if you look here, the Polaris Project conservatively estimates that a pimp with a stable of 3 girls or women enforces an average nightly quota of $500 or $1,500 a night. You can read through the math there, and that comes out to almost $550,000 a year. And because this is completely illegal, obviously that's not taxable. So this person is pocketing $550,000 a year by trafficking young girls and women. So when we did our last SHARP refresher training, John Choi, the Ramsey County attorney, came in and talked to us about a lot of this information. And he said that a lot of times what they're seeing is that sex traffickers are drug dealers that got smart. So they're making a lot more money, it's harder to find, and it's harder to prosecute. So like I said up until recently, the pimp really didn't get in trouble. They really didn't have a lot of consequences when these girls got caught, because the girls would get caught, they often wouldn't give up who he was, and then they would be prosecuted as prostitutes. So the average age that girls are first victimized is between 12 and 14. Of total sex trafficked victims between 2008 and 2010 were United States citizens. So more than 50% of them start as runaways. I'm sure all of you have seen on Facebook or on the news that there's always another missing girl somewhere, right? I know that there was a couple from this community not too long ago. There's been a couple from further north, and there's always a bunch in the Twin Cities. But a lot of times what happens is girls are coerced by somebody that they meet online, and they end up going there thinking that this person is in love with them, and he is going to take care of me, and when they get there, it turns into a sex trafficking situation. And it sounds like something that we just see on Law and Order Special Victims Unit, or something that doesn't really happen. It's a problem somewhere else. But this is a huge problem in the state of Minnesota too. So the number of street girls who become entangled in prostitution networks is over half, 55%. 75 of them end up controlled by a pimp. So why do we talk about it here? How many of you know a girl between the ages of 12 and 14? That's almost everybody in this room. How many of you think that you would recognize it if that girl between the ages of 12 and 14 was at the beginning stages of ending up in a prostitution ring? We've never had that education, and a lot of times those initial stages, those initial indicators, are more time online, or a few times that they don't tell you where they are, and they're out somewhere, and then they come home a little later than they said they were going to. It's not victimless. So like we saw, 85% of the girls are being trafficked by a pimp, a boyfriend, or sadly in many cases a family member. Most of the girls don't have a choice. They're being held by force, fear, and coercion. Most of them are underage. And Minnesota is the 13th highest sex trafficking state in the nation. And the two biggest areas for that, not surprisingly, the Twin Cities, but also Duluth. And obviously it's a crime. Personality changes might be one tip-off that a soldier is being trafficked. So if we're looking at those statistics that tell us that most commonly it's our females, junior enlisted, 18 to 24, that are being sexually assaulted, those females in that category also fit into this one. So those are important things as leaders to be aware of, that it might not just be that young girl that we know on the civilian side. It could be one of those soldiers in your unit. We can get resources if anybody that you know is being a victim of sex trafficking. So this talks about the early stages and what the process is. But about 1 to 4 weeks for the recruiting phase, 1 to 3 days for trauma bonding, and then 1 to 2 weeks for training. And I'm not going to go through this whole chart. But basically in recruiting, you're identifying and befriending them. They're trying to get information about them. So if it's one of your soldiers and they find out that they're in the military, that's some pretty good ammunition for coercion. Well, I will tell the people that you are in the military with that you are a prostitute. I will show them these naked pictures of you that I have. I will show them this pornography that I forced you to create, and I will ruin your military career. That's pretty big. And that's going to have a huge influence, especially on somebody who's brand new into the military. For that second phase of trauma bonding, they're breaking down barriers and trying to establish dependence. So this is where a lot of those initial threats come into play. They could be abducted. I don't know how many of you saw that news story. It was probably about 3 weeks ago now. It was a gentleman from, I think, somewhere in the West Metro. He had already had sex with this 14-year-old one time. And the police found her advertisement for sex online that she had placed herself. And they used that to catch him a second time. So when he went to meet with her the second time, they caught him. And in his van, here in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities, he had lined the back of his van with plastic. And he had a large suitcase, a suitcase large enough to fit a child in. So you can imagine what his intent was when he picked up this young girl, this 14-year-old girl, for his second sexual encounter with her. And she was in Cottage Grove, either Cottage Grove or Woodbury. So this is not only happening in inner city with people who have poor family structures, and it's not homeless girls that it's happening to. This is happening to people in our own communities. So it's really important to be aware of that. And then training, so preparing the victim for commercial sex, making them do all these things, teaching them the business, and showing them the consequences of noncompliance. So this is a highly abusive environment that these girls end up in. So a lot of those ads are online, and the internet has become, it's a blessing and a curse, right? It's created all these opportunities for knowledge for us and for resources, but it's also created a lot of problems. Sexting and social media. So sexting. Has anybody in here not heard that term before? I didn't think so. So sending any kind of sexually explicit pictures, videos, or messages via cell phone. Deliberately leaked or accidentally leaked. We've all seen the stories about celebrities whose nude pictures have been shared, but people will use that as coercion as well. So really the guidance, don't ever send those. Because if you break up, those can be used as revenge porn and to coerce you into doing other things that you don't want to do. It exists in cyberspace for years. There are people who can go in and find these things that are just sitting out there. It can be traced back to the source. It can be hacked and sent from someone else. And this is certainly not the worst thing by any means, but anytime you put something like that out there, anytime you create that vulnerability, future employers could find it. People in the military could find it. One of my good friends took command of a unit, and her second drill, one of the soldiers realized that a new female soldier who had just come back from AIT was in a porn. And he shared that information with everybody else. So now you've got this young female soldier, I think she was 20 or 21, and everybody in her brand new unit now knows that she was in a pornographic film. So those things are out there, people see them. Again, they can be quickly spread. You can get in trouble in the military for doing these things. So it's best, again, to just avoid it. If you get caught, and these were unwanted pictures, or shared pictures that are not yours, you may have to register as a sex offender if you do this. So that's a pretty important thing to keep in the back of your mind, that it's not just posting a picture of somebody else online, it's not just sending that explicit text to somebody you're interested in, but it's a crime. So again, don't do it. And let your supervisor know if someone is sexting to you and you don't like it. So we're gonna watch one last video here.
Hotness. You know what is so deliciously hot to me? I'm with the person I like, and there's a little bit of sexual tension, and then they lean over and they're like, "Can I kiss you?" I don't make that sound. Usually. Why is it so sexy? Because they asked for consent if it was okay, which shows one, that they respect me, and two, that they've got some basic sexual communication down. Hot. But consent isn't just hot, it's also mandatory. Sexual contact without consent is assault or rape. Here's the thing, people often think of sexual coercion as something that's, violent or physically restraining. In reality, sexual coercion is often much more subtle. It happens between two people who know and maybe even trust each other. The perpetrator will use pressure, manipulation, drugs, alcohol, and force to initiate sexual contact without permission. Even worse, in the real world, sexual coercion is often seen as acceptable. Like pushing someone over and over and over after they've said no, or throwing yourself on someone without warning because it's romantic. Oh, that shit's not romantic. It's just creepy and salty and rapey. So can you not do that? Are you enjoying yourself? How does that feel? Do you like that? Do you want me to keep going? How far do you want to go? You look uncomfortable. Are you okay? Good consent is basically just checking in. It's paying attention to someone's body language, how they're doing, keeping those lines of communication open so that everyone's on the same page and everyone feels safe and comfortable, which means this is not how you ask for consent. Nope. Come on, I thought you liked me. I promise you'll like it. Just do it for me. What's the big deal? We've had sex before. I'm so horny right now. You liked it last weekend. Douchebag alert! Also, potential rapist alert. Rapists often see sex as something that's owed to them. Sex is never something that's owed to someone. Doesn't matter if you've been flirting, if you hooked up before, they bought you dinner, not even if you're naked. Pushing someone until they finally give in is not consent, because you're basically not giving the option to say no. So how can you know if someone is consenting once you ask? Yes, please. Oh man, that feels so good. Keep going. I'm down for anything in these areas, but not these areas. Yeah, right there. Why, yes, I would like that. Notice how consent is a clear yes. It's enthusiastic. I want it. It's out loud, and there's no doubt in your mind. And remember, consent can always be retracted. So if you feel like the vibes have kind of changed, or you're unsure, getting mixed signals, you want to check in. This is what no might sound like.
I don't like that. Can you stop? I'm not ready for this. Can we slow down for a second? I'm not into this anymore. I guess, if you want me to. Please don't.
Just because someone doesn't say no doesn't mean they're saying yes. They might feel uncomfortable or guilty or not know how to say it. So that is why it's really important to hear that verbal out loud yes. If they're being quiet, ask them, hey, how you doing? What's up? How's it going? Everything okay? And that, my dears, basically, in a nutshell, is how you practice good consent. So now I want to talk about some situations where consent cannot happen, even with a verbal yes. Sometimes people get drunk. You may have learned this about the world. When it comes to sex, a little bit of alcohol isn't a big deal.
But if they're too drunk to drive, they're too drunk to give consent. Period.
Getting sexual with someone who's wasted, slurring their words, their body's limp, they can't communicate clearly, maybe they're throwing up, that's absolutely sexual assault. Let's all do the right thing and take care of them, not take advantage of them. Sometimes when I'm at schools, people ask me, well, what if they're both really, really drunk? Pretty simple. Sex is an active thing. It requires the intentional action of at least one party to get it done. Remember, sex isn't something that happens to someone. It's something that happens together. Both people participating. This kind of having sex with someone who's intoxicated or in this compromised state is against the law. You can be expelled and you can go to jail for it. The age of legal consent, it varies by state, it varies by country, but for an adult to have sex with a minor is statutory rape. And in general, when people are in two very different parts of their life, it raises some red flags. This ties in with situation number 3. You hold authority over them. You can't get consent from someone who you have power over. So I'm talking about things like teachers and doctors, therapists, coaches, priests, caregivers, famous actors, maybe even famous YouTubers with their fans. When one party depends on the other, when they trust them, rely on them, when they idolize them, it severely impairs their ability to consent. Why? Power dynamics like these come with strong underlying vulnerabilities, which can give the appearance of consensual sex when it's actually exploitative. Someone abusing their power. We need to make open lines of communication and consent just a standard, normal part of sex. Not a situation where most teenagers can't even describe what consent is. But we do have the power to change it as individuals, and by spreading this information to other people, we can help to create something called consent culture. That's a culture where all the sex that is had is sex that is wanted, and that's how it should be, but that's not how it is. Give me all the consent. I'm ready. I love you all so much, and I will see you again next time. Bye-bye.
All right. So that video just kind of summarizes all of the topics that we talked about. Consent, when it's not appropriate, what sexual assault is. If you ever feel that you have been sexually assaulted, or you know somebody who's been sexually assaulted, or you have questions, as I said, I am a victim advocate. Sergeant Andrew Lee is a victim advocate. Who else in this room is a victim advocate? Anybody? Sergeant Bryant is a victim advocate. You can come to any one of us.
Sergeant Myers too.
Master Sergeant Myers too, thank you. You can also contact Chief Diaz. She is the state SARC. And then for those of you who knew Ray Schwartz, she's not working there anymore, and Master Sergeant Mellon is now fulfilling her role. So does anybody have any questions on anything that we covered today?
There's another movement called Not in My Squad that I recently read about. I'm not sure if it's Army-wide yet, or are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with that.
It's just
I
a
will give it a go.
grassroots, my realm of influence is right here, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure it doesn't happen in my squad. Multiply that by all squads in the Army, and then potentially eliminate it. Is the concept of it.
Sounds great. So not in my squad? Awesome. So as always, when I teach SHARP, I encourage you to take all of this information and soak it in and share it with your soldiers and use it to create that positive environment here. Use it to create that positive environment wherever you go next and in your civilian lives. Take something from it and make something a little bit better. All right, that is all I have for you.